I'm Lucy Blum. If you haven't attended any of my classes in the past, I do a lot of quilting, but I love to sew and do hand stitching like embroidery and cross stitch and things like that. So we've been doing a series of different type of work, and this class is about embroidery and coloring the fabric. So here's a couple examples where I colored with color crayons the picture first, and then I did the embroidery on it. And here's another one with a cat. And then this one is what we're going to do today. It's a pattern that I only did the embroidery, but we're going to do the coloring on this one. Not this particular one, but we're going to use this pattern. And because I always color first. So I've picked out a few color crayons, greens for my cactus, like a burnt sienna for my pot, and then turquoise and purple or lavender, orchid they call it, for my pot decorations. And you can use any variety of colors. You can use various shades of green, or you can just use one green. So the first thing is to take your pattern, your printed pattern. Here, I'll do this upside down so you can see. And I have my fabric all pressed nice and flat, and just I just kind of eyeball it because a lot of this is going to be extra fabric anyway. And then I like to trace mine with a pencil. I just do a really light. You might not see it on the computer. I think it shows up, but I just do a light tracing with the pencil, and then the stitching, the embroidery floss will cover that up once we get to the stitching part. Okay, so I have my cactus drawn, and then you can put this in a hoop, but you would do it backwards. You'd put it so it lays flat on your table, and the hoop is on top. But what I like to use is freezer paper. And what that will do is we'll attach that to the back of the fabric, and that will stabilize the fabric. And you almost don't even need anything. You can also just color. You can just come in and just color on the fabric. It probably won't move around. So what I'm going to do is just the darker green kind of along the edges. Just to kind of create some shadowing Now move to one of the lighter colors. Oh, that's my light. Here's my medium. So then I'll bring in the medium color. So I want, I may just do most of my cactus with this medium color. That's a nice pretty green. So you don't have to color the whole thing. You could just do the highlights around the edges. But this is I'm going very lightly on this. I don't want to really coat a ton of crayon on the layer, on the fabric layer. And it also helps to have like a scrap piece of fabric. So you pick out a color and you're like, well, I'm not sure how that's going to show up. So on your scrap, you can do some practice. So what does it look like if I go really light? What does it look like if I go really heavy? If I press down really hard, it gets darker. Probably can't see that as well, but like here's with the turquoise. So if I go really light, it just gives me a faint shadow. If I go press really hard, it's going to get really dark. So in some areas you may want to press harder, and then other areas you might want to go lighter. And then if you kind of, so I've got the medium green, I'm going over top of the dark green, and I'm kind of to shade it, I don't know if you can see, I'm kind of pulling away from that edge, and that just helps blend the colors into each other so that you don't have a rigid line of the dark. Also, you can sometimes take a Q-tip and just kind of smear it around, and that'll help blend those two colors together. There, so that's one section so far. And then here, let me finish this other little side over here. Again, just pulling away from that edge where the dark line was will help blend those two colors together. And then what we do to set the color in, let me slide you over just a little bit, is we're going to, and you can wait to do this at the end, but I'm just going to show you. You take, I have a pressing pad, a wool pressing pad. The crayon side is up, and then I'm going to put a paper towel down on top of it, and then iron, just press on it on top. And the heat from the iron will melt the wax and just leave the pigment. So you probably can't see it on the screen, but it did pick up a little bit of pigment on the paper towel. But now this color is set into the fabric. Not sure if it's easier to see on the, yes, it doesn't make a difference. Okay, so I'm going to keep going here. I'm going to switch back to my darker green for this edge. Then you could add, each one of these could be a slightly different color. Like this one, I might have more dark than the first one. So I'm making my outline, my edges just a little bit thicker. Then when I switch to the medium green, I'm just pulling in from the edge. Just helps blend those two colors together. my fabric has a little pill on it. Let's see if I can pick it off. No, actually, I think it's a snag, so I'll just have to leave it for now. It'll just add some. It looks like a spine. And on this one, I'm gonna go with the lightest green too, although it may not look much different. And I am going to iron. I'm going to take the freezer paper with the shiny side up and put the paper on top of it. And what that does is that when you press it with the iron, it will melt the wax paper, the freezer paper, the shiny side, which has wax on it. It'll, better put that down. It'll press it to the back of the fabric and stabilize the fabric. Oops, it didn't stick. Hold on. Let me turn it over.
Lucy, what setting do you have your iron on, please?
I have it on linen,
Thank
hottest.
you.
Yeah,
Thank
so yeah, you just have to test your iron. You want to be careful with the paper. You don't want to get it too hot, but usually if you just move your iron around, don't leave it on there too long, it'll be fine. There, so the paper is now stuck to my fabric, and it comes off real easily. You just peel it off. It doesn't leave any waxy residue. It's a good way to stabilize the fabric. Now, the fabric won't move at all when I'm coloring on it. So I'm gonna just add a little bit of that lighter green down the center. So just play around with your colors. It's like coloring in a coloring book. It's actually a lot of fun. Yeah, that looks pretty good. What do I do with my Q-tip? I'll get a fresh one. So here I'm just going with the Q-tip, and actually my green is it's pretty dark, so the Q-tip will lift some of the color off if you get too much on there. So I'm just going over it. It helps blend it in and smooth out the coloring. But it will take it off the fabric. So just remember, if you have too much color on there or it got too dark on you, you could lift it off a little bit. But that looks pretty good. Get a little variety between my cactuses. All right, so I'm gonna heat set that one. Make sure you get a clean spot on your paper towel or get a fresh paper towel. There we go. So that one's done. Let me see if I've got a green. That one's too fluorescent. Let me find a darker green. Not having much luck here. Again, so I'm not sure if this is the color green I want. Yeah, that's kind of nice. It's the other green I was using had a lot of blue in it, so I'm going to use this one just as a variety. It's called Granny Smith Apple. Then I could go straight to the Sheen green. That's almost the same. Oh, here's another light green. A green yellow, that might be pretty. Use that here in the center. It's more of a yellow instead of a green. That's kind of pretty. So what's nice about the crayons too is that you can kind of, you can change the shade of the color by just coloring over top of it again. So if it's not dark enough, just pick another color and that's darker and go over top of it. All right, just blending these. It also kind of, smooths out the color also. So you don't have one big lumpy, big area where there's a lot of crayon sitting on the fabric. All right, so that just gave, a little variety to the cactus. So I'm gonna find a pretty red. This one's pretty bright. Wild strawberry. And I'll probably just do the blossoms just all in this one color. I'm not gonna try to do any shadow or blending. But you could take, that's burnt sienna. You could take a dark red or macaroon. Could do a little bit darker down here at the bottom. And then blend it up to the other color. That's kind of pretty. So changed my mind. That looked nice. No, I can't find it. Macaroon. Just added a little pretty darker red there. Just be careful that you're using a clean Q-tip when you start to blend this, because you don't want to go outside your line. If you do, it's no big deal. It's going to be so faint you won't see it. You're just trying to get just some tinting more than, it's more of a tint rather than, a mass of solid color. All right, so I have all my blossoms done. That's looking really good. And this color just, the coloring just adds a lot of dimension to your project. So I'm going to press that now. Set the colors in. There we go. So yeah, so it did lift some of the red. You can see that.
Lucy, what about washing that after you've done it?
Yeah, it should be fine. You shouldn't have any. You probably want to hand wash it, but because you're doing you're ironing it, you're taking all the wax out and just leaving the pigment in there.
Okay.
I've heard. I mean, I haven't tried it myself, but I've heard that it's washable. That
okay.
It's permanent, but I haven't tested it. I probably should do that. What I could do is just do some coloring on a sample fabric and then wash it. But the ironing should set it in there so that it's not going to wash out.
Okay.
All right, so I am ready to move on to my pot, and I had this burnt sienna I was going to use for the edges. For the pot itself. And because mine's small, I'll probably go ahead and color the whole thing in. And first I just do on the outside to kind of give it the darker shadows, the shading, so it looks like it's rounded. Should have picked out a lighter color too. Oh, this one looks good, raw sienna. So I'm just going to go really light with this raw sienna because I don't want it to be too dark. And I'll use the Q-tip to blend this one instead of the crayon. There we go. All right, let's see. Do some more down here. Okay, so my pot, I'm going to do the zigzag, the chevron. I'm going to do that in turquoise. I'm going to do this one in orchid or purple. So I'm not going to put any brown on those areas. So I'm going to skip over the chevron and skip over the line. Just doing some shading to make it look like it's curved. So it's best to, go color lightly, because you can always come back and add. It's a little bit harder to take it away if you got too much, but the Q-tip does a pretty good job. So I'm just going to blend that a little bit. Okay, and then I'm going to use my lighter raw sienna. Very lightly, because I just want a really light brown there, and I think this is probably, I don't know, what's this one? Tumbleweed. That's kind of pretty. That's kind of light too. That might work. But I've got the big 96 crayon pack, and if you don't have a variety of crayons, maybe you only have a 12 pack, maybe you only have one brown. So, but just coloring very lightly will give you a lighter shade of the color. And then if you want it darker, just add another layer, press a little bit harder. But if you go over the fabric very lightly, you can get just a very, very subtle color. This Q-tip is just, it kind of like smooths out the color, blends it into the, it's actually forcing it into the fibers of the fabric, because I wasn't pressing very hard. With the crayon, you want to go over it with the Q-tip just to push that color into the into the fibers of the fabric. There, that looks pretty good. There, so see how, I could maybe even bring the color out a little bit more, the dark out a little bit more to give it more depth, but that looks pretty good. So let's move on to the turquoise. And first I'm just going to go over it with a real light touch. And then for the edges, then I'll go over it a little bit. Go over it again, make it a little bit darker. It's just a subtle shift in value on the crayon so that it kind of gives it that curved three-dimensional look. And again, just and be careful with the blending because you don't want to take it over the line into the other color. Like I said, we're tinting the fabric. It's not going to be solid like paint would be. And so when I do my stitching on the outline, it'll look great because it'll fill in the gaps where you might not have any color. Okay, and then I was going to use this orchid for the stripe down at the bottom. And it's kind of similar in value with the brown, so I might make this one just a little bit darker. I almost feel like that took off too much color, so I'm just going to come back with the crayon again. All right. That looks pretty good. So let's go over and press it. And there, oh, that didn't take very long to color, did it? Any questions before we start? I think I'll get out my embroidery floss and then start doing the embroidery on it. Or if you have questions or you want me to demo some other image, I can do that.
That looks great. That's beautiful.
Thanks. Yeah, it came out really pretty. I hadn't colored that one before. The cat one is fairly large, and I did his whole body in brown, different shades of brown. So it took a while to color that one.
Mm-hmm. And that material is just cotton?
Yes, either sometimes I'll stitch on muslin,
Mm-hmm.
but this one is just a quilting weight cotton, so it's a little bit heavier than the muslin, and It works really well for the coloring. The embroidery might be the embroidery works pretty well too. It's not that dense. That muslin is easier to stitch on, but the quilting cotton is fine too. So let me grab my embroidery floss. So let me show you, if you don't use the freezer paper, see that it just tears right off, doesn't leave any waxy residue. But if you want to color using the embroidery hoop, you put it in backwards. So normally you would put your piece with the pattern side up and put it in the hoop, and you would stitch, or you would stitch that way. But to color, you want to flip your piece over, put the hoop from the back, get your fabric nice and you want it tight, but don't overstretch it. Just want it to be kind of drum tight. Tighten your hoop, and now you color from this side. That gives you stability on your fabric, so it doesn't move around while you're coloring. But for stitching, I like to do it the other way. The only reason I don't do it with the hoop is that I don't know, just the hoop kind of gets in my way. Not that bad, but all right. So I'm going to start with the pot. So no, let me start with the cactus. So on embroidery, I like to start with what's in the back of the image and work my way to the front layer. So think of it in terms of layers. So what's behind what? So the pot's in front of the cactus here. So I want to do the cactuses, then the pot, so that sometimes it doesn't really make a difference, but if you need to, so if I brought my green stitch lines all the way down to the edge of the pot, if I stitch the pot, it can maybe overlap some of, or stitch over the green floss from the pot, and so the brown stitching is in front of, or laying on top of, the cactus stitches. Okay, so I have this. Looks like a good color for the pot. Looks like I might have a piece of it already here. Got my needles. Okay, so I like to embroidery with 3 strands, and I already have this one separated from another project. So I have 3 strands here. I do about I don't know, 20 inches or so. You don't want it too long, because then it starts to fray. But you don't want it too short, so that you're having to switch thread every 5 minutes. So I just leave a tail there. And you can either do a knot. I don't mind knots in the back of my projects. You just have to be mindful of where they are so that you don't stitch through them. Okay. So now I think about what's my stitch direction or what's my stitch path. So I'm going to start here and come around this way, and then I can either go around this way or it can go around that way, and that will. And I'm going to do just a back stitch on this. I'm coming out one stitch away from my starting point. So my line's going to start up here. So I go back one stitch. Now I come forward, and then I go back. And this is where the knot gets in the way. So I'm just pushing it away with my fingernail so that I don't stab through it. And if your threads get a little loose there, just tighten them up again. And even though these colors change, I'm not gonna stitch them with the different colors. I don't think I did that in my other piece. Yeah, I just did brown all the way around. And now that I got it going, a lot of times I'll do the sewing method, but make sure your needle's going straight down and then come up a stitch length away. Your needle goes straight down and then come back out. Oh, come on. So you can see the floss really just cleans up that line, and how, because of the dimension of the thread, you really can't color. I guess you could. It'd be hard to be able to color right up to the edge, and then when you press the wax off, it might end up sticking into the thread. So that's why I always color first. Plus, I don't like to press my embroidery. I'll put a towel down so the threads can kind of sink down into the towel, because you don't want to mush your threads so they're so flat. You kind of lose the texture of the threads if you press it too much. This would be real pretty in a blue bonnet pattern. I should see if I could find one. I'm a little close to the hoop here, so it's kind of hard to get my needle to maneuver. Also, my thread's getting pretty twisted, so I bring the needle all the way down to the bottom here, and then just with my fingers, my fingernail a little bit, just smooth out those threads so that they untwist and lay flat. Have you guys done any embroidery projects? Couldn't get it to come up where I wanted it. This sewing backstitch is a nice one to for straight lines, because I just lay my needle across my stitch line, so I know that wherever I come up, it's going to be straight. At least it's going to be in line with the other stitches. But you can do other stitching on this. I think on my for the let's see. It looks like for the cactus, I did a stem stitch. And then for the blossoms, I did a back stitch. Yep. So by doing the stem stitch, it gives a little more thickness on the cactus. So that was good. But with the coloring, we might not don't necessarily have to do a stem stitch. It'll work just fine with the back stitch. All right, well, you can see, so now I'm starting to go around this edge. And when I get to the corners, a lot of times I will, especially if it's a rounded corner, I'll make my stitches a little bit smaller just so they look better. If you make them too bulky, they'll be kind of choppy. if you make them too long. So this is a fairly rounded edge right here. It's like a corner. I can't reach, so I'm gonna have to come back up. So I'm doing a little bit smaller stitch so I get a nice rounded line. And now that I'm on the straightaway again, I can take a little bit bigger stitch. All right, I'm gonna stop there with the back stitch because I think everybody's got that. Let me show you stem stitch. So let me find some green. A variety here. Oops. That's a little dark. I don't think I want to use that. It's more of a gray. It's nice. Or even this, let's see, I don't know what the color is. They don't have names, just kind of like this green here. And to use this one. So I pull off about 20 inches or so. I'm just doing, I'll just demo one of the cactuses so you can see the stem stitch. So I'm just going to separate these. So I have 3 threads. And if you hold them, here, let me bring my camera up a little bit. You let the tail just sit down and pull slowly. They'll twist apart. There we go. They might twist up a little bit, but get this down. There we go. Just smooth it out with your fingers. And if you have trouble threading, there's some good needle threaders. This is a good needle threader. Has a little wire on the end. You poke that through the needle, put your thread through the wire, and then pull it through. All right, so I'm gonna put a knot on this end, and then let's just start with this first one. So for stem stitch, you start right at the beginning here. Come up where your line starts and go down. It's a little more than 1 stitch, not quite 2 stitches, but almost 2 stitches. So a little bit bigger stitch to start there. And then what you want to do is, and I can make a loop there and hold it to the side, is you want to come up right next to that first stitch. Not in the same hole, but pretty close to it. And now I'm going to go forward 1 stitch and come out where the other stitch started, where you went in. I'm going to go down and come back up. So you come up right in that same hole. And so I always lay, and you want to always lay your fabric to one side or your thread, one side or the other. It doesn't matter, but you don't want to keep changing it because the stitches won't lay the same if you change it. So because I'm left-handed, so I just bring it down to my right thumb, hold it with my thumb, and do the next stitch. And so this makes a little bit wider, stitch than the back stitch. So it's a great stitch for adding lots of texture for your outline. Now, before I go too far, I want to get this little section here. So I'm going to come down like I'm doing a regular stitch, but I'm going to come out, or actually, I think what I'll do is I'm going to weave my thread in and come down to where that cactus, the other piece branches off. So I'm going to come up right on that line. See my needle. And again, do the same. And this one works really well for sewing because you don't have to get it in that same hole. You could be just close to it. Oops, thread tangled. Just have to remember that, again, if you're doing a curve or a rounded corner, you want to make sure that you use smaller stitches. Okay, so here I'm just going to come back down in that same stitch to end off that row. And now I'm going to come back up on this side. Oops, I lost my, hold on, I'm gonna have to plug in. Hold on a second. See, I have to go get my charger. Sorry about that. There we go. I have to charge up my tablet. Okay, so I'm almost to the end of this one. So I'm going to do that last stitch, and then I'm going to finish it off by going into the same spot where I came out. All right, now to pick this back up, I just come forward here. Let's see, where do I start? I'm going to start right beside this other stitch. Actually, I should have been on the other side, so there. So thread off to the one side. Now there's also little spines here. I don't think you could do them now. It kind of messes up the rhythm though of this back stitch or this stem stitch. And you also may want to use a different color. You may want to do something a little bit lighter, or even maybe like a brownish orange or something, maybe something that shows off those spines a little bit, or, the pokey things. I call them spines. Maybe a darker green to kind of show those off a little bit more. All right, so that finishes that line. And then what I would do is I would do this next, I do the wavy line down, this one back up, and then go down this way. Just kind of figure out what path you're going to take. And if you get to a spot where you don't have any more, you're not close to your next stitching, just tie it off and start in the other area. All right, so I am going to pause here with the green, and on the flowers I would do a back stitch on that one. And then let me show you the French knots for the little stamen things, little cactus things. So in my sample here, I used yellow. In my first project, I used yellow, but it really didn't show up. So I'm going to use something different, like maybe, see if I can find a bright pink that'll kind of go with the red. Here, yeah, it's kind of like a raspberry red. And let's see, there's 4 threads here, so I'm just going to use the 4 threads. 4, 3, doesn't matter. We're just doing French knots, so 4 threads will be fine. And if you wanted the spine, these are like, I forget the type of cactus it is, but for these wavy lines, if you want to do four threads for that, it would make even a thicker line, which would give you more dimension, more texture. So just because a pattern or instruction says to use 2 threads or 3 threads, you could do 4. I wouldn't, for something this small, I probably wouldn't do 6 threads. That'd be probably too much. All right, so got my knot tied. right, so for the French knot, come up from the back. And there's two different knots you could do, a French knot or a colonial knot. I like the colonial knot, but I'll show you the French knot too. So French knot, basically you're gonna take your needle and you're gonna wrap the thread around it a couple times, 2 or 3 times. Just wrap it, and then I'm kind of holding it with my finger here. And I'm gonna go back in, but just a couple threads away from where I came out. If you go down the same hole, you could lose, everything could just pull out to the backside. So now with my needle in the hole, but not all the way through, I'm going to tighten the thread here. And I'm going to hold it with my thumb. So basically, I want that thread to stay twisted. And if you pull it too tight, it's hard to get the needle through. But you want it tight enough so it doesn't come untwisted. So I'm just gently pulling the thread through and holding the twisted knot on top until you get towards the end. Just let it slide out from under your thumb. And there's your French knot. So I'm going to do that again. Come up, wrap your thread 2 or 3 times. I did 3. Hold it with your finger. Go back down just a couple threads away from the first one. Pull the thread tight. Anchor it down with your thumb. And then just gently pull the thread through so you don't get any tangles. There, so the 4 threads made a nice French knot. So let me show you a colonial knot. They look very similar, but I feel like the colonial knot is really making a knot, and it stays in a lot easier. So what I do is I wrap around my needle first, and then I'm crossing this tail over and I'm wrapping around the needle like the French knot. But that first one is wrapped the opposite way, so that's what creates the knot. So I'm going to pull this down again, hold it tight, anchor it with my thumb, make sure my thread doesn't get stuck on my hoop. Slowly pull that through, and then there's the colonial knot. So you really can't see a difference. I don't think visually it doesn't look any different. And because sometimes if the French knots are too loose, they could actually come untwisted because you basically have just twisted the yarn, whereas the colonial knot, you have physically made a knot in your thread. And I think I might just use this same thread for the blossoms. I think it's real pretty. That way you don't have to make a knot there. And but I've got 4 layers, so might be a little thick, but it should be okay because I'm doing a backstitch. Backstitch should lay pretty flat. And then because these are kind of small and straight, you can just do 1 stitch. So come up come up in the bottom, in the valley, and then go up to the mountain. Hopefully on camera. So up in the valley. My thread keeps getting tangled. Well, yeah, technically I should be going forward and then back, and so one stitch you start at the bottom, and then the next stitch you start at the top. But it doesn't really matter because they'll look the same on the front. Your back will look a little bit different, but it'll still work. And if you're using a larger if you use the larger pattern, you may want to do more than one stitch, but because mine's so small, I'm able to get away with 1 inch, 1 stitch. I don't like my stitches much more than, you know, say 1/4 inch wide, long, 1/4 inch long, I guess. Okay, so to go around the bottom here, I'm going to remember backstitch. You come up a stitch away, and then you go back. Come up a stitch away. Keep getting tangled. Yeah, so pay attention to your back. I keep my fingers back there so I can feel if the threads are getting tangled or not. I think I'm gonna untwist this. It's getting a bunch of twists in it. So needle down to the cloth, and then just run your thumbnail on it a couple times. This is kind of a long piece too. I normally don't do this long of a piece. I should have cut it shorter. All right, so now I can do, if I want, I can do a sew method instead of, so when you poke it down and pull all the way through, and poke it up and pull it all the way through, that's called the stabbing method, where you're going down and then coming right back up by bending your needle, not bending your needle, but rocking your needle. That's called a sewing method. Sometimes the stabbing method, I think for me anyway, it's a little more accurate. So if you're not getting even stitches, or your line is too wobbly, it's not going straight, try doing the stabbing method for a while. The sewing method is better for a straight line. A little bit harder to do on the curves. All right. Well, there's my little flower. It's so cute. All right, so in my opinion, so my next pink or red, whatever you want to call it, is way over here. So I don't want to carry a thread that far across the back. So I'm going to tie this off and start over on that side. So to tie it off, I go under one of the previous stitches. My green stuck in the way. I go under one of the previous stitches so I'm not making the knot right there in the last stitch. Go under it again, and then keep a loop here and go through the loop. And that'll create a knot on the back. And then instead of cutting it right next to the knot, what I like to do is just weave it for a few stitches. My hoop's getting in the way. But just weave it under those other stitches for a few stitches. That just locks that tail down, and your knot won't come undone. I feel like I have to sneeze. All right. Well, that's coming along. I think I'm gonna stop here for today unless you have any questions. I think we've covered all the stitches that you need to finish the embroidery.